I'm John Beaudin from the Aircom Radio Network, and we're up to the final part of our three-part series, a long conversation I had one afternoon with the former lead singer of Firefall, Rick Roberts.
Let me ask you a blunt question. Do you think you'd be dead if you hadn't met Mary?
50-50.
Yeah.
Maybe, just maybe I'd have found something else to wake me up. But I know that with Mary, I definitely was going to stay alive, because not only with her being my guardian angel, but I had a reason to stay alive,
That's true.
So it's a twofold thing. But go ahead. It's 50-50. I mean, I was definitely that. I had a lot of very strong events in my life that should have said, "Hey, slow down, Panda." And I wasn't doing. I had stopped sniffing and things like that by the time I met her, but the alcohol stuck around for a lot longer. And as I also tell the story in my book, I should have known better from the start. My mom, who died with 17 years of sobriety and counting, she was a wonderful example. I mean, I watched just as a little boy. I watched as she went through hell with her whole thing. She committed herself to the Florida State Florida State Hospital, which was a mental institution, because they didn't have rehab programs back then. And I went to visit her every week with my family in Arcadia, Florida, and was exposed to some people who were really, really mentally ill. I mean, some of the things that happened there were unbelievable. But she was appointed a trustee within about 3 weeks and came back from there having kicked her pill habit. But the alcohol was something else that stuck around for another, 20, 25 years. And it cost her marriage with my father. And my sister was very alienated from for a long time until she got sober. My brother was kind of about her, I tried to support her, and especially as I got deeper into my own habit, but nonetheless, I had up close and personal first-hand information about this is not going to end well, so I just got into drinking to counteract my cocaine. I started with the Rito brothers. I hadn't had a drink since one drinking incident when I was 18, and I pledged at a fraternity in college. Well, I de-pledged about 3 weeks after that, by the way. I'm not a fraternity boy, but I wouldn't have done too well in there anyway, drinking or not. But anyway, I had one sit there. I got so drunk that I didn't have another drink till I was 21, and there we went out to do our first road gig with the Byrds. In Nebraska. The game, maybe it was on. Let's get the new kid high, So I got real high. I said, "Boy, I don't know how I can play like this, And if she couldn't understand me, I said I didn't know if I could play like this. So they said, "Here's what you do: have a couple of drinks. It'll cool it out." So I balanced, shifted. And I was drinking more and sniffing less. And finally, I stopped sniffing. When I stopped writing songs, I stopped sniffing because there was no longer any reason to be sniffing. And so I just said, okay, no more. And I stopped. But the drinking stuck around for quite a lot longer.
I've talked to a lot of people through the years who wrote books, and there was that need to, when you write a book, of going, how transparent do I want to be? I either tell the story, part of the story, I got to tell the whole story. And it's challenging and it's humbling, and I'm sure it was maybe for you or maybe it wasn't. I don't know, because you seem comfortable in your skin. But when you have to write a book and you're telling someone, well, I went to jail, and I've got friends who's made some mistakes, who've been in very similar situations, and I don't look at them any differently. I'm just going, life lesson, another life lesson. Really? Sometimes you have to play things out 100 times for it to play out the way that you want it to play out. But when you started writing this book about this experience, was that ever a thing you had to ask yourself, do I tell part of the story? Do I tell the whole story? How transparent did you want to be?
Well, with this book, this book started as part of my whole memoir, but when I went through this whole long-term experience. When I started off, I'd go to a party or something or a gathering. I'd tell a couple of anecdotes, and there'd be someone, as I'm sure you experienced yourself, as many people have, somebody, oh, that's so funny, you had a book, yeah. And then that transformed into people saying, Rick, you've got this incredible catalog of stories, and nobody tells them as well as you do, so what if something happened to you? Those would be lost. You really should write a book. And I was still resisting that, saying it'd still be a coffee table book, and besides, every rock and roller's got stories, And then one evening, a guy that I knew, who was a rock critic for the Denver Post, heard the exchange, and he pulled me over. He said, Rick, come here. And he put his arm on my shoulder and said, look, he said, you've got some great stories, I've heard, but a lot of musicians. I said, yeah, that's what I've been saying. He said, no, wait. You also had the story of your comeback from alcoholism and your comeback from your injury. So you got a story that might benefit some people. So maybe you ought to think about that. And it changed my outlook. So I wrote my memoir, and I sent it to an agent who'd been waiting for a year to get it. And when I didn't hear back in about 4 days, I wrote her a note saying, Sarah, did you get my manuscript? She said, yeah, Rick, and we started to print it. But Rick, it's 200,000 words, and a memoir is supposed to be about 100,000 words. Well, now, if I'd have been on top of my game, I'd written her right back and said, well, maybe I just had twice as much story to tell. But I wasn't that much on top of my game, so I didn't. But I called my editor and I said, look, we got to cut this down. And so we started dissecting the book. And the first thing we did was we took out part 5, which was song stories. Because when I started writing the book, people said, you're going to write about your music, right? I said, well, sure, But when I got to the part where I'd be writing about music, I thought, how would I work that into the narrative? I couldn't figure it out. So I decided I'd write the lyric to a song and write a story about it, and I'd intersperse those. But when I was finished, I had about 40-some songs. And when I tried to put them in, it cut the flow of the book to shreds. So I put them in the end as like a glorified appendix. So I said, we'll just cut that out. And she said, no, we can't do that. Your fans are going to want to know about that. And in fact, I've got real good response from that. I find out that's still in the top 100. It's like number 60 or something in the top 100 rock books 2 years after it came out. Oh, wow. So that's a neat thing. And I've got a lot of correspondence from people saying, boy, I love hearing the background stories on your songs. So that's all cool. Anyway, she said, no, you can't cut that out. Your fans are going to want that. Then we went on talking to her. I said, okay, look, why don't we take the story of your injury and your alcoholism and make that a... Next thing was, we said, my editor and I said, okay, look, why don't we take the story of your injury and your alcoholism and make that a book of its own? And the only time she had a pause was when I came up with the title, Lame Brain. She said, what do you want to call it? Lame Brain? I said, yeah. She said, and she called me about 2 hours later. She said, I love your name. I love it. But anyway.
She had to feel it. She had to feel it out a little bit.
Yeah, really. The thing is, when I took that, both with both books, I had to flesh them out from what they were, because they weren't a whole book by themselves. They were like 100 pages of stuff. And that's not a book, that's a pamphlet, So I elaborated more, I went into more detail than I had done with just the whole memoir. And I told the story, but even in the whole memoir, when I started telling the story of my alcoholism and my injury, I wanted to tell all of it, because otherwise the idea that might be a benefit to someone else was gone, I mean, I'd have to tell the whole story and tell the truth. And I'd never really had any questions about it. I figured with the whole memoir, I tried to tell the truth. And the best comment, by the way, I've gotten about either book is from some old-time friends who have called me or seen me and said, reading your book is just like talking to you. And that's the way I think it should be. But I'll tell you what, Mary was very, very nervous about Lame Brain for a while. She's completely behind it and thinks it's wonderful and all that, but she was really worried about me telling too much stuff, and would it have any effect on us, with our friends and like that. And I told her from the get-go, I said, no, I don't think so, because my friends know my story, and anybody else who can't live with the truth of my experience is, I think, pretty narrow-minded. I mean, once again, as a comeback story. If I was, I'll tell you what, I would have been so ashamed I would not have been able to write it if I was still a practicing alcoholic or something like that. But no, I'm telling, this is what happened, and I said, and I came back. And hopefully it will. In fact, Mary recently just gave it to her doctor, and her doctor saw it and saw enough of it to say, I'm going to finish this and give it to my fellow doctors. I love that. I think that's great, because what I really love, an ideal situation for lame brain would be if I could get it into the hands of some doctors and some physical therapists and some people who are in similar situations to the one I was in physically or with their alcoholism. Because as you know from reading the book, the way I came through my alcoholism was not the normal way that people come through their alcoholism. And so that is something to give a different light of perspective on people who are dealing with that. Maybe they aren't getting any response from AA for themselves or from any of the programs that are out there. And with the injury, the one thing I noticed, and the one thing, what I was going to say, ideally, I'd love to be able to go out and speak behind this to the people who are in similar situations. And, tell them, obviously, I'm not going to go out to some people who had TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, and say, okay, just do what I did and you can cure it, because that certainly isn't the case. Yeah. But here's what I found. I found that a lot of patients sense, this again is from the book, but it's my policy line, my party line, if you will. A lot of patients, due to the fact that a brain injury and the recovery from it is so not hit and miss, but so stop and start, one step forward, one step back, two steps forward, one step back. It's very frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating. And a lot of people just give up hope. They just, this is hopeless. Nothing's going to get better. I just learned to do that, and I can't do it again. Nothing's changing. Yeah. Okay. The same thing rubs off with the therapists. They have only a small percentage of the people that get well, so they get to a cynical viewpoint, or jaded, more than cynical. Yeah. They get jaded, and they start losing hope to an extent, and they start going by the numbers. I saw a therapist doing that. Mine didn't, but a lot of them start going by the numbers. They'll prescribe X, Y, and Z exercise for someone that's in the book, and those people go out and do X, Y, and Z exercise. That doesn't cut it. You got to go about 2 steps beyond that, and you got to attack the whole thing. So my bottom line is that, and once again from the book, I'm not saying if you give up on it, which is really what it amounts to. If you say I'm not going to be able to beat this, you're done. You might as well just stop even going through the motions. I also said early on, because I went through about 8 rehabs, and in the first 6 or so, or 7, whatever, I really was convinced that I was going to make a change, that I was going to stop drinking. In those treatments, in those terms of rehab, I didn't think I was going to start drinking. So I did think in the first rehabs, I thought that I was going to change. But things, eventually, after a couple of months or something, I was back at it. Towards the end, before my last rehab, I pretty much had given up on rehabs because I saw what had happened every time. And I at that point, I had kind of accepted the fact that I guess I'll be drinking to some extent for the rest of my life. Maybe I can keep it under control. But then I went back to one more. I made up my mind I was going to go back to any more rehabs. But I then came up with the idea of what it was that kept getting me back in drinking, which was boredom, which is having nothing else to do with my life. And I felt, well, maybe if I put this information in the hands of the counselors, they can use that to address my particular case. Yeah. And like that. So, but my stopping drinking was almost an accident. Yeah, just not an accident, but it was a result of some very unusual circumstances, which I talk about in the book and like that. So the thing is, you have to believe, I think, that you're going to stop drinking. You have to keep on trying. I think it's, for me, I realized, for instance, I say this in there, that for me, AA was the answer. I always, that's one thing that part of your quote, I think, got mixed in there. It's like, I never felt more like taking a drink than at the end of an AA meeting. Those meetings had exactly the opposite effect on me than they are supposed to have on people. I would hear all this, oh boy, I have such a hard life. It's so that I'd go, give me a break, and I want to hit the nearest bar. So I stopped going to AA, and believe me, I'm totally in support of AA. I think that they are a program that, for most people, they are a lifeline that those people won't have any other way. It's just that there are a few people. I've always been kind of an odd duck in many respects, and for me, it just didn't work that way.
Yeah.
Maybe I just had a series of different AA meetings. More than one. Some people told me, you just went to a bad meeting. No, I tried a few, but it always had the same effect.
Michael, as a drummer, I mean, I know that Larry was going through his own thing and you were, but as a drummer, I mean, did he ever have challenges playing? I mean...
Well, yeah, Michael, in fact, had a lifelong thing. He speeded up a lot of the time. You know, he didn't keep real steady. He was occasionally brilliant. And anyone who's ever played with him will tell you this. They'll say, oh, yeah, you question Michael's drumming? Listen to 8 Miles High. Because the drum part he put on there is so wonderful.
Yeah.
And Michael could be wonderful. And his speeding up was just because he was emotionally into it, man. And I loved playing with Michael. I played with him in 3 bands, the Burritos, Firefall, and a group I was in the 80s called the 20th Anniversary Salute to the Birds, which was a real Rick Danko, Blondie Chaplin from Beach Boys, John York from Latter Day Birds, and me. And that was a great group. And Michael was a wonderful singer's drummer. He knew not to try to make the drums another solo instrument. He laid it down like Ringo does, or like Charlie Watts does. They play there, and they're part of the rhythm section, boy.
Yeah.
And that's it. Michael, he is a guy that, you know, Chris Hillman and I, Chris is still a very close friend. We talk on a regular basis. And we both decided that there are kind of 2 guys from our era of music, because all the drugs things were really part of the culture, very much. Oh, everywhere. Not just music, but it was especially highlighted in music because you had free access to all these drugs all the time.
Yeah.
But the thing is, most of our peers have either gotten straight or gotten dead. That's pretty much the way it happens. Some people woke up in time, and others did not. And that's a pretty radical choice. And I'm glad I woke up later than most, but... you know, it's just those are your final choices.
One of Elton John's first drummers, Roger Pope, and he played with them on Rock of the Westies in '75, and then left again. Then played with Hall & Oates and a few other people. Sue, his widow, my son did a tribute to Elton John from Blue Moves, and she saw it, and we got to know each other. And because he's a big Roger Pope fan, my son was. But anyway, and Nigel, but. She says something interesting, and you might have heard the term, you know, all these rock stars are dying right now. A lot of them are. And she had mentioned it. She says Roger Pope went into the doctor, and he told him about his lifestyle, where he'd been with Elton and all these people and all the drinking he did. And the doctor looked at Roger Pope probably a year before he died, and he said, oh, you have lifestyle cancer. He said, no, I have cancer over here. Wherever. Pardon my ignorance, I forgot what it was. And Sue had written about it an awful lot of going, this lifestyle cancer, which I'd never heard of before. But then you go, well, of course. Some people, for whatever reasons, their body just kicks it to the curb. But that, you know, good on you that you're still with us.
Yeah, I'm glad I am. Yeah, so... I just think that, you know, it's a tragic thing that some people don't get it. And you know, Chris Hillman calls the 70s the decade of death, you know, because so many of our peers died needlessly. I've lost more than I care to count. But, and just plus, you add in the natural attrition of people who die from other things, you know, things that happen in real life, you know. It's astonishing. But I'm glad to still be here. I intend to stick around for as long as I can. I still got a few things I want to take care of. But you know what? I bring it back to this because I want to answer that question you said you ask everybody about albums that are overlooked.
Please, thank you, yes.
First of all, my main thing is not so much a particular album, but an artist, and that is John Martin. John Martin never made it big over here. He was a big star in England, I understand.
Yes.
That's Martyn. I know you knew who he is.
Yeah.
But he was brilliant. He opened for you one time in New York City, and I almost didn't want to go on stage. I almost didn't go on stage. I definitely didn't want to, because I was going, how am I going to follow that? He just went up there with his guitar, his voice, and he had a loop, an electronic loop, which was before anybody was using. This is the early 70s. And he would track a part on his guitar, and then start playing another part over the loop, and then play a third part. He'd have like 3 or 4 parts going. Then he'd sing this neat background thing that was just hypnotic and a little trance chant or something, and then put the lead vocal to that. So he's a whole band all by himself. And I'm going, how can I follow that? And it was amazing. But the man, to me, I always said he sounded like Tony Bennett on heroin. So, because did you ever hear the song? He had a song called Fine Lines. It was on his Inside Out.
I don't know.
I'd recommend his stuff. I can't believe he didn't ever get more popularity over here. The other overlooked albums that I think, and I may be a little biased, but I think the 2 Rick Roberts.
I hope he's got the balls to say that, because I don't know you, right? I thought, and I ask artists sometimes, and I'll always say, they'll say, oh, I guess I shouldn't say that. I said, no, you should say that. If you don't believe in your album, I mean, I was just, Brent Bourgeois from Bourgeois Tag, I was just telling him his first album was underrated, and he says, well, it actually did quite well. I says, I liked it so much, it should have been up here, And he went, hey, thanks.
Yeah, well, I still have a lot of DJs who write me and say, I still play this, that, and the other cut, and one of the best albums, tell me it's one of their favorite albums. And so I think they're really good albums too. And the one line that you always love hearing for old material is, it's really stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And and for that, I would just a postscript to all that I have to say to any other prospective songwriters out there. Avoid at all costs the urge to use a hip phrase in your songs. Don't ever say shake your booty or any of those things. They're very hip today, because in 6 months they'll be not only not hip anymore, they'll be so passé and overused that people are sick of hearing them. So I've tried in my songs never to use things like that. I want to say things like like razzmatazz and things like that they haven't been said in a while.
That's a good point. I've never heard anyone say that, but that's probably one of the truest things any songwriter has ever told me. That's a good.
People who try to get in on a hip phrase, they might get one hit single out of it if you get on the early stage. Yeah. But in 6 months, nobody's going to want to hear that song ever again. Yeah. And they are most likely not want to hear from you ever again either. Yeah. Please. Thank you very much, And I've had a wonderful time. And Mary says thank you, too.
Thanks, Mary. You're an angel.
You are too. Thank you.
Take care.
I'll talk to you later.
Goodbye.
Make sure you check out part 1 and part 2 of our chat with former lead singer of Firefall, Rick Roberts. And comment on our videos and subscribe to our channel. We'll also check out your videos. I'm John Beaudin from the AirCom Radio Network.